President Obama enters his final year, the nation is struggling. But in his eyes, he's done a fine job and believes he would win re-election again. He really believes it. And that's a memo. Now, the top story tonight, reaction joining us from Washington, Charles Krauthammer. Did you pick up anything else in that 60 Minutes interview, Charles?
Well, just the stuff you showed is almost clinical. I mean, we really are in a pretty dangerous spot when our president, after 7 years, is delusional about what's happening in the world. Let's take, I mean, it's hard to know where to start, but where he said, who's going to take on ISIS? And he said, oh, yes, the community of nations will take it on. The community of nations doesn't exist. What is he talking about? The UN? What is he talking about? The Nobel Peace Prize Committee? Or maybe he means the International Olympic Committee. They'll send in a javelin team against ISIS. This is an adolescent sort of Columbia undergraduate fantasy about the community of nations.
Well, he's mentioned many times his 60-nation coalition. In fact, he did mention it to Croft last night. The 60-nation coalition, which is non-existent, as you just said. It doesn't exist. I mean, anybody can say, yeah, I'll sign up to get ISIS, and they don't send anybody and do anything. And you know, there's no coordinated 60-nation offensive against ISIS. So,
well, imagine that you're one of the remaining Free Syrian Army guys, trained and equipped and supposedly protected by the CIA. This is in camps in Jordan, out there who are being absolutely wiped out by Russian air power right now. And as they die, their consolation is to think that, as Obama said, you know, after all, the Russians only have two allies here, Iran and Hezbollah, and he's going to die knowing that Belgium is with him. I mean, this is a president who's living on a different planet, but it's not harmless. People are getting killed. And worse than that, the people who are getting killed, this is a civil war, it would happen without us. But the people who are getting killed now by Russian arms are people who trusted us, were trained by us, and depended on us. And the message to the entire Middle East, to the Saudis, to the Israelis, to the Jordanians, to the Egyptians, who have depended on us to have their back for now 50 years, they look at a president who is delusional about what's happening and thinks that he's actually winning in this region.
Okay. Now, you used the word clinical. There is no doubt in my mind, and I think you concur, that President Obama believes every word he says. All right? He believes that because he hasn't committed any more U.S. ground troops in the region, that's a win for him. Even if Afghanistan topples, which it will 3 or 4 years from now, just like South Vietnam did. All right? Even if ISIS beheads 3,000 people. Well, we'll get around to it. You know, all the nations will, will finally do it. But he believes that he's a genius. What is that?
Well, I think he also believes something. I think he has a theory of history. I hate to elevate it to such, you know, noble terms, but I think he does, and he says it. He always says, he repeats the line from Martin Luther King, the arc of history is long, but it tends towards justice. He does believe, and he said this in many of the UN speeches, he said that control of territory, he said this only a few weeks ago at the UN, that control of territory really doesn't matter in the 21st century. He said power ultimately dissipates. He is right that in 100 years, Assad will be gone. So he doesn't really have to do anything, and the Russians are just wasting their time and incurring a lot of cost. But in the meantime, a few generations, a lot of people are going to die. And American influence will erode, and the Russians and the Iranians and the bad guys and the jihadis are going to be in control of swaths of the world. There are going to be all kinds of other calamities. But he has a theory that in the end, in the 21st century, somehow when the calendar changed in January 2000, the world altered itself, and after thousands of years of countries determining their future by power, and whether they were strong enough to defend themselves, that no longer applies. And the community of nations now is going to take on the likes of ISIS. He seems to believe this. And I can imagine what they're thinking in the capitals of the world. Can the president of the strongest power on earth truly have this kind of adolescent view of the world, this kind of ultimate idealism, totally detached from reality, that it really doesn't matter? When Ukraine was invaded by the Russians, What did Obama say? His policy was to offer Putin a face-saving off-ramp to save him from this calamity.
Right.
He imagined you go into Crimea, it has to end badly.
But you know what?
It doesn't.
You know what's even worse than one individual, even though he's a president? His whole party, the whole Democratic Party, and maybe 50% of the country, they don't care. Charles, thank you.